Lyra Voss had learned a long time ago that the safest way to live was to be invisible. In the border town of Ashmere, where shifters walked the streets with their heads high and their power on full display, a girl with no pack and no name worth remembering had only one advantage: nobody looked twice at her. She scrubbed floors at the inn, carried water from the well before sunrise, and kept her eyes down when anyone with strength in their blood passed by. 19 years of practice had made her very good at disappearing. She did not know that her blood was the reason she had to hide. She did not know that somewhere in the ruins of an old and broken bloodline, her name still meant something. All she knew was that she was tired and hungry most days, and that the ache of loneliness had become so familiar it barely hurt anymore. That morning began like every other. She swept the steps of the inn while the town woke up around her, wagons creaking, merchants shouting prices, dogs barking at nothing. She did not notice the man who paused at the corner across the street. She did not notice him at all, in fact, until the air around her seemed to shift, as if something ancient had just opened its eyes. King Draven Ashgrave felt it before he understood it. He was passing through Ashmere on a routine inspection of the border, nothing more, a task he could have handed to any of his generals. But something in the wind stopped him mid-step. A scent, faint and unremarkable to anyone else, hit him like a blow to the chest. Omega scents were common. He had smelled hundreds in his life, and forgotten every one of them within the hour. This one refused to be forgotten. Deep inside him, where the beast slept coiled and quiet, something stirred. Draven had carried the beast since birth, an ancient spirit wolf bound to his soul, feared by every soldier under his command, because even Draven himself could not always predict what it would do. It rarely reacted to anything. It had not stirred in years. But now it pushed against the inside of his chest like a fist against a door, and Draven had to grip the hilt of his sword just to keep his composure. He told himself it was nothing, a trick of the wind perhaps, or exhaustion from the road. He turned and walked away without looking at the girl sweeping the steps, and he told himself he would not think of her again. He was wrong. That night, the hunters came for her. Lyra woke to the sound of her window breaking. Before she could even sit up, a hand closed around her wrist and yanked her from the bed. She screamed, but the sound was cut short by a gloved palm over her mouth. Two men in dark cloaks dragged her toward the door, murmuring to each other in a clipped, businesslike way that frightened her more than shouting would have. They were not robbers. They were hunting her, specifically, and they seemed to know exactly what they were doing. She fought as hard as she could, clawing and kicking, until one of the men struck her across the face and she stumbled into the alley behind the inn, half dazed. That was when she saw them clearly for the first time. 4 shifters, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark, closing in around her with the calm confidence of men who had done this before. She thought, in that moment, that she was going to die without ever knowing why. Then something enormous moved through the shadows, and the world changed. It happened so fast that later, Lyra could barely describe it. One heartbeat, the alley was full of armed men. The next, something huge and powerful tore through them, moving faster than her eyes could follow, and the men who had come to kill her were suddenly fighting for their own lives instead. She pressed herself against the wall, shaking, as a massive silver-eyed beast, part wolf, part something far older, finished what it had started in a matter of seconds. When it was over, the alley was silent except for her own ragged breathing. The beast turned toward her. For one long moment, it simply looked at her, its enormous chest rising and falling, its eyes holding an intelligence that felt far too human. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it shifted, and King Draven Ashgrave stood in its place, breathing hard, looking as startled as she felt. Neither of them said anything for a long moment. "You are safe now," he finally said, though his voice sounded uncertain, as if he could not quite believe the words himself. Draven brought her to the palace that night, telling his council it was a matter of protective custody, nothing more, a necessary precaution after an attack within his own borders. It sounded reasonable enough. No one questioned it, not at first. But Draven knew the truth was more complicated than that. The beast had not chosen to defend her out of duty. It had acted entirely on its own, breaking free of his control in a way it had never done before, and it would not settle now that she was near him. In the days that followed, the beast made its feelings known in small, undeniable ways. It paced restlessly whenever she left a room. It went quiet and calm only when she was close. Generals who had served Draven for decades began to whisper that the king was bonding, that his beast had chosen its mate whether he willed it or not, and that no one, not even a king, could fight something so deeply written into his blood. Draven denied it, of course, at first even to himself. He told his advisors it was simply a delayed reaction to the danger, that the beast was merely being cautious. But every time Lyra walked into a room, something inside him settled in a way it had never settled before, and every time she left, something in him ached with an emptiness he did not have words for. Lyra, for her part, was too frightened to think much about what any of it meant. She had been pulled from her small, quiet life into a palace full of strangers, who watched her with curiosity and suspicion in equal measure. She did not understand why anyone would want to kill her, and she certainly did not understand why the most powerful man in the kingdom kept finding excuses to be near her. It was an old servant woman, kind-eyed and quiet, who first noticed the birthmark on Lyra's shoulder, a faint shape, like a crown, with one point broken away. The woman went pale and said nothing, but that evening, Lyra found a small locket tucked beneath her pillow, old and tarnished, with a symbol engraved on its surface that matched her birthmark exactly. She did not know what it meant, but something in her chest told her it mattered. Over the following weeks, pieces of her past began to surface, brought to her carefully by people in the palace who seemed to know more about her than she knew about herself. A lullaby she remembered from childhood, one she had always assumed her mother made up, turned out to be an old song sung only within the Voss bloodline. The locket had belonged to a line of Omegas who once held great influence in the kingdom, before they were hunted nearly to extinction because of an old prophecy, one that claimed a forgotten Omega of that bloodline would one day change the fate of the throne forever. Lyra was terrified when she finally understood. She had never asked to be anyone's prophecy. She had never wanted to be hunted, or protected, or watched so closely that she could barely breathe. All she had ever wanted was an ordinary life, one where no one looked at her twice. But it was too late for that now. Draven, too, wrestled with what he had learned. He had spent his whole life believing the beast inside him was simply a weapon, a tool of war passed down through his family line. He had never imagined it could want something for itself, could recognize someone the way it had recognized Lyra, instantly and completely, in a way that had nothing to do with strategy or duty. He began to seek her out, not as a king protecting a valuable asset, but as a man trying to understand why his own heart had begun to feel less like his own. They talked in the quiet hours of the evening, when the palace was still and no one was watching. She told him about her years scrubbing floors in Ashmere, about the loneliness she had carried so long it had become part of her. He told her about the weight of ruling a kingdom that both feared and depended on the beast inside him, about how tired he was of being seen as a weapon instead of a man. Slowly, without either of them fully realizing it, something gentle began to grow between them. Not the fierce, consuming pull of the beast, but something quieter and more human. Draven found himself laughing more in her presence than he had in years. Lyra found herself, for the first time in her life, feeling as though someone truly saw her. But the danger had not passed. Whoever wanted the last Voss Omega dead had not given up simply because their first attempt had failed. The betrayal came from inside the palace walls, which made it hurt all the more. A trusted advisor, one who had served Draven's family for years, had been secretly working with a rival throne, feeding them information about the palace's defenses, in exchange for promises of power once the Voss bloodline was finally erased. On a night when the palace was quiet and most of the guards had been sent away on false orders, the hunters returned, this time with far greater numbers, moving through corridors they had been given the layout to in advance. Lyra woke to shouting in the halls and the clash of steel. She ran, as she had been taught to in case of danger, but the throne room, meant to be her safest refuge, turned into a trap. Blades closed in around her from every direction, the traitor's voice cold and satisfied as he ordered the final strike. Draven arrived just as the first blade came down. He did not think, he simply acted, throwing himself between Lyra and the strike meant to end her life, and in that instant, He made a choice that would be spoken of in the kingdom for generations to come. He released the beast completely, surrendering every last shred of control, allowing it to take over entirely so that it could do what he alone could not. The beast rose with a fury the palace had never witnessed, tearing through the attackers with a speed and strength that seemed to defy nature itself. But even a creature as powerful as the beast could not take that many wounds without cost. Blade after blade found its mark as it shielded Lyra's body with its own, absorbing damage that would have killed an ordinary man twice over. It did not retreat, it did not falter. It simply stood between her and death until every last threat in that room had been ended. When the fighting finally stopped, the beast collapsed, shifting back into Draven's human form as the last of its strength gave out. He lay in the middle of the throne room floor, blood soaking through his clothes, his breathing shallow and uneven. Lyra dropped to her knees beside him, pressing her hands against his wounds, sobbing his name as though it could somehow hold him together. Guards flooded the room moments later, along with healers who worked frantically to save him. The entire kingdom would later hear how their king had collapsed at the feet of a servant girl no one had ever heard of. The beast curled protectively around her, even in its final moments of strength, refusing to yield even as death crept closer. For 3 days, Draven did not wake. Lyra did not leave his side, not once, not even to sleep. She held his hand through the long hours, whispering to him the way he had once whispered to her, telling him about small, unimportant things. The way the light looked through the palace windows in the morning, the sound of birds outside, anything to remind him there was still a world waiting for him to return to. On the 3rd day, his eyes finally opened. He did not ask about the kingdom. He did not ask about the traitor, or the damage done to the palace, or the political consequences that would surely follow. The first word out of his mouth, rough and barely audible, was her name. Lyra broke down in relief, pressing her forehead against his hand, unable to speak through her tears. In the weeks that followed, as Draven slowly recovered, the truth of what had happened spread through the kingdom, and with it came a shift no one had expected. The court, which had once viewed Lyra with suspicion, began to see her differently. They had watched their king, feared for his strength and his unpredictable beast, choose to nearly die protecting a forgotten servant girl. Whatever the old prophecy had once meant, whatever fear had driven a bloodline to near extinction, it was clear now that the ending everyone had once feared was not the one unfolding before them. Lyra chose to stay. Not because she was afraid to leave, and not because the palace had somehow become the life she had always wanted. She stayed because for the first time in 19 years, something ancient, powerful, and completely beyond her understanding, had looked at her and decided, without hesitation, that she was worth everything. The forgotten Omega had not come to unmake the throne, as the old prophecy warned. She had come to save the man who sat upon it, and in doing so, she had finally found the place, and the person, where she truly belonged.